Number, the hunter's ghost. Number, part I, the shadow awakens. The Afghan night pressed down like wet concrete. Through her scope, Morgan Riley watched the enemy compound with eyes cold as winter steel. For 11 hours, she hadn't moved, barely breathing, her crosshairs fixed on the doorway where intelligence said the target would eventually appear. Patience. Silent shadow, whispered David Hayes through her earpiece. The mouse will leave his hole. Morgan's finger rested beside the trigger of her SR-25 rifle, not on it. That was the discipline that had earned her a place in SEAL Team Falcon. At 32, she wasn't just any sniper. She was a ghost in human form, capable of holding positions so perfectly still that once, a desert fox had stepped over her legs without registering her presence. The radio crackled again. Control says we abort in 20, if no movement. Storm front coming. Hayes sounded disappointed. He'd tracked this target, a bomb maker responsible for 38 American deaths, for months. I'm not leaving empty-handed, Morgan whispered back, her voice barely audible even to herself. The wind shifted slightly. She recalculated, adjusting her scope 2 clicks left. That's when the door opened, spilling yellow light into the compound. The target, a slight man with a distinctive limp, stepped outside, stretching his arms above his head. Morgan breathed in, held halfway. The crosshairs steadied. Between heartbeats, she squeezed. 800 yards away, the bomb maker dropped. Through her scope, Morgan watched as the compound erupted in chaos, men shouting, running in all directions, firing blindly into the darkness. They would never find her. By dawn, she would be a ghost story they told to scare new recruits. Confirmed, Hayes said, satisfaction evident in his voice. Silent shadow strikes again. Time to vanish. Morgan packed her rifle with ritual precision, each movement practiced until it became muscle memory. Nothing left behind. No trace. This was the 93rd confirmed elimination for SEAL Team Falcon in 18 months. The most lethal special operations unit in Afghanistan. Back at Forward Operating Base Talon, the atmosphere was electric. 90 operators, the full Falcon contingent, crowded into the mess tent, passing around contraband whiskey disguised in coffee mugs, celebrating another perfect mission. These were her brothers and sisters, forged in training so brutal it had a 60% washout rate, bonded by shared danger and absolute trust. Elena Rodriguez, Team Falcon's senior medic, slid onto the bench beside Morgan. "To the woman who never misses," she said, bumping shoulders with her friend. At 29, Rodriguez was the heart of the team, with hands that could both heal shattered bodies and disassemble an enemy with brutal efficiency. "I missed once," Morgan replied, the corner of her mouth lifting in a half-smile. "Kazakhstan, 2018. "You were shot in the shoulder and still completed the mission," countered Michael Chen, the team's tech specialist, joining their table. "That doesn't count as missing." At 26, Chen was the youngest operator on the team, but his genius with encryption and battlefield hacking had saved them more times than anyone could count. Hayes dropped onto the bench across from them, his weathered face serious despite the celebration. At 42, he was the old man of the team, the steady hand that had shaped Morgan from a talented recruit into the deadliest sniper in the region. "Command's got something big coming," he said quietly, leaning forward. New intelligence on Nazari himself. The table fell silent. Abdul Nazari, the mastermind behind the bloodiest terror campaign in the region's history. Taking him down would change the course of the war. When? Morgan asked, all celebration forgotten. 4 days, but something feels wrong. Hayes looked troubled. Intelligence came in too clean, too perfect. Routes already been mapped, but they changed our approach vector at the last minute. Morgan studied his face. "You think it's compromised?" "I think we need to be extra careful. I've got a few contacts I'm going to check." Hayes finished his drink. "Watch your 6, all of you." Later that night, Morgan couldn't sleep. Hayes's concerns echoed in her mind. She slipped out of her quarters, finding him alone by a burn barrel, flames casting shadows across his face. He looked up as she approached. Can't sleep either? Morgan shook her head, joining him by the fire. You know why they call you Silent Shadow? Hayes asked suddenly. Because I hold position better than anyone, she replied, watching the flames. It's more than that. You become part of the landscape, not just hidden in it. Pure focus, pure will. Hayes looked directly at her. You're the best I've ever seen, Riley. The absolute best. Morgan shifted uncomfortably. Praise wasn't something she knew how to process. Listen to me, Hayes continued, his voice dropping. If something happens, if I go down out here, I want you to be the one who hunts them for me. Promise me that. The intensity in his voice surprised her. Nothing's going to happen to you, Hayes. Promise me. Morgan nodded once, solemn. I promise. It seemed like just another night, another campfire oath between warriors who lived with death breathing down their necks. But 3 hours later, Morgan jolted awake to the sound of explosions ripping through the base. The attack came from all sides, precision mortar fire first, taking out communications and the armory. Then waves of insurgents breaching the perimeter with uncanny knowledge of guard positions and blind spots. Morgan grabbed her sidearm and ran toward the command center, but a secondary explosion caught her, sending her flying through the air. When she regained consciousness, silence had fallen over forward operating base Talon, the kind of silence that only comes after absolute devastation. Morgan pulled herself from the rubble, blood streaming from a head wound, her left arm hanging useless at her side. The base, her home, was nothing but smoking ruins, and her family, all 90 brothers and sisters of SEAL Team Falcon, lay scattered like broken dolls. She moved through the destruction in a daze, checking for survivors, finding none. Hayes lay near the command center, his body riddled with bullets. He had died fighting, weapons still clutched in his hand. Rodriguez was nearby, her medical kit open beside her. She'd been trying to save someone when death found her. Chen's body was by the communications building, surrounded by spent shell casings. As the sun rose over the ruined base, Morgan methodically collected 90 identification tags, laying them in perfect rows on the scorched earth. Her hands didn't shake, her eyes remained dry. Tears were a luxury she had abandoned long ago, somewhere between her second tour and her first confirmed kill. Then she saw it something that didn't belong. A fuel drum marked with symbols that weren't U.S. military issue. Near it, the remnants of a communications device not on their equipment manifest. Morgan's training kicked in. This wasn't just an attack, this was betrayal. Someone had sold them out, someone who knew their exact positions, their security protocols, their shift changes, someone wearing the same flag she wore. In that moment, something changed in Morgan Riley. The silent shadow became something else, something cold and patient and utterly without mercy. The hunt had begun. Number Part 2, The Ghost Who Hunts. For 3 days, Morgan hid in the ruins of Base Talon, becoming invisible when the recovery teams arrived to catalog the dead. She'd always been good at disappearing, at becoming part of the landscape. Now she used that gift to become a ghost in truth. She worked through her injuries, methodically cleaning and binding her head wound, setting her dislocated shoulder against a concrete slab, biting down on a leather strap to keep from screaming. Pain was just information. Information could be processed and compartmentalized. By night, she scavenged the destroyed communications building, piecing together a working system from 5 different damaged units. The backup server had survived, its armored case buried under rubble. Inside it, she found 6 months of encrypted traffic. Morgan's hands moved across the keyboard with the same precision she applied to her rifle. Numbers, patterns, anomalies. She tracked them like prey. Hayes had taught her that information was just another kind of terrain, with its own elevations and hiding places. The pattern emerged like bones from sand. Team Falcon's mission parameters had been leaked 3 times in the past 4 months. Each time, insurgents had been waiting. Each time, casualties had mounted. But this last attack was different. This was annihilation. The encryption key that had been compromised was rotated weekly, known only to Falcon leadership and 1 external coordinator at Central Command. Morgan pulled the personnel file. Colonel Marcus Webb, intelligence liaison, 23 years of service, decorated veteran. Then she noticed the date. Colonel Webb had died in a helicopter crash 14 months ago. Someone had been using a dead man's credentials. Someone with access to the deepest levels of military intelligence. Someone who knew the system well enough to hide inside it like a virus. She kept digging, running voice recognition software on archived communications using Webb's stolen signature as a filter. Buried in a routine status report, she found a voice in the background, caught on an open mic. Male, American, with a distinctive vocal pattern. 3 matches appeared in the database. 2 were retired. 1 was active duty, stationed at the Regional Command Center. Captain Nathan Reed, logistics officer in charge of supply routes and communications infrastructure. The perfect position from which to betray. Morgan pulled his photo, studying the clean-cut features, the square jaw, the eyes that look sincere in every official photograph. She memorized his face the way she memorized wind speed calculations and bullet drop charts. Before leaving her hiding place, she collected what little gear remained: her backup rifle and scope, 3 magazines, the combat knife her father had given her before her first deployment. She took Hayes' dog tags from the collection, placing them in her breast pocket over her heart. "I promise," she whispered to the ghost of her mentor. Morgan moved through Afghanistan like a hunting cat, patient, methodical, lethal. Her first target was Anwar Zabidi, the local insurgent leader who'd coordinated the ground assault on base Talon. For 2 days, she tracked him through the foothills, studying his routines, his security, the moments when he was vulnerable. On the morning of the 3rd day, she watched through her scope as he emerged for morning prayers. The call to prayer masked the sound of her shot. 800 meters, clean through the heart. As his bodyguards scrambled in panic, Morgan vanished into the landscape. Later that night, when they moved the body, they found Hayes' dog tags placed on Zabidi's chest. A message, a promise. Her second target was more challenging: the Bagheri brothers, bomb makers who had designed the explosives used at base Talon. They operated from a heavily guarded compound in a village controlled by insurgents. Morgan infiltrated at night, using the irrigation ditches that ran beneath the village walls. Security was heavy. The brothers were valuable assets, protected by 24 armed men with night vision equipment and motion sensors. She waited in a storage room for 17 hours, perfectly still, controlling her breathing, becoming part of the darkness. When the younger brother entered to retrieve supplies, she struck silent and precise. One hand over his mouth, knife across the throat, lowering him gently to the ground. The elder brother came looking 2 hours later. The same silent end awaited him. Morgan left Rodriguez's tags on one brother, Chin's on the other. 2 more names honored, 2 more debts paid. But as she exited the compound, a guard spotted her shadow against the moonlight. Gunfire erupted. A bullet grazed her thigh as she vaulted the outer wall, disappearing into the night. The wound wasn't serious, but it left a trail of blood, evidence of her vulnerability, her humanity. She treated the wound in an abandoned shepherd's hut, gritting her teeth as she cauterized it with the heated blade of her knife. No hospitals, no support, no extraction. She was a ghost now, operating beyond any official sanction or protection. By her 3rd target, the enemy networks were buzzing with panic. They spoke of a shadow warrior, a woman who killed from distances they couldn't comprehend, or from right beside them without being seen. They called her the hunter's ghost, and their fear traveled faster than she did. Her 3rd target was different, an American military contractor named James Wilcox, who had facilitated communications between Reed and the insurgents. He knew what was coming. He had helped plan it. And he believed his private security detail, former Special Forces operators now working for corporate money, would keep him safe. Morgan studied his fortified residence in Kabul from multiple angles, noting the security cameras, the patrol patterns, the 4-man teams that rotated every 6 hours. Conventional infiltration would be suicide. So she waited. For 6 days, she watched from various vantage points around the city, learning Wilcox's habits, his weaknesses. Every night, he spent exactly 22 minutes on his rooftop terrace, drinking expensive scotch, making phone calls he didn't want overheard indoors. On the seventh night, as he raised his glass to his lips, Morgan took the shot from an abandoned building 1,100 meters away. The bullet shattered the glass in his hand a millisecond before it entered his forehead. By the time his security team reached the roof, Morgan was already gone, leaving behind a calling card. 20 tags from Falcon operators arranged in a perfect circle around where the body had fallen. But Wilcox's death had consequences. His connections were deep, his allies powerful. They analyzed the shot trajectory, used satellite imagery to identify potential firing positions. They hired local assets to canvass every building with line of sight to the terrace. And they set a trap, a safe house supposedly containing information about Reed's operation. They seeded rumors about it in channels they knew Morgan was monitoring. They prepared the building with motion sensors, infrared cameras, and a full tactical team lying in wait. Morgan saw the trap for what it was, too obvious, too perfect. But she also saw opportunity. She approached the building shortly after midnight, deliberately triggering a perimeter sensor, letting them catch a glimpse of her shadow moving past a window. The tactical team converged on the second floor, night vision activated, weapons hot. Meanwhile, Morgan had already moved to the building's underground parking garage, where fuel and ammunition were stored. She placed small charges at strategic points, then retreated to a position 400 meters away. When the team leader gave the order to breach the second-floor room where they believed she was hiding, the first explosion ripped through the garage below. The chain reaction that followed turned the entire building into a column of flame. Through her scope, Morgan watched impassively as the fire consumed the trap and those who had set it. She hadn't come for revenge. Revenge was emotional, unprofessional. This was justice, cold, calculated, necessary. But as she moved to leave her position, pain lanced through her side. She looked down to see blood spreading across her shirt, a bullet wound, somehow sustained during her approach to the building. She hadn't even felt it in the moment. Morgan stumbled, her vision blurring. This wasn't part of the plan. She forced herself to focus, applying pressure to the wound. Using the medical techniques Rodriguez had taught her, she stabilized herself enough to move, but each step was agony. She needed shelter, medical supplies, time to recover, but most of all, she needed to reach Reed before her body failed her. The final target, the architect of Falcon's destruction. As dawn broke over Kabul, Morgan Riley dragged herself into an abandoned basement, blood trailing behind her. For the first time since the hunt began, doubt crept into her mind. Not doubt about her mission, but doubt about whether she would live to complete it. In the darkness of that basement, Morgan finally allowed herself to remember. Not just Hayes, Rodriguez, and Chen, but all 90 faces of Team Falcon, their voices, their laughter, their stories cut short, and as consciousness slipped away, she whispered a promise to them once more. "I'm coming, just need a moment to catch my breath." Number Part 3, Justice in Shadows. The regional command center stood like a fortress in the desert, surrounded by layers of security that would have deterred any conventional attack. Inside, men and women in uniform moved through their morning routines, making the small decisions that kept a war machine functioning. In the central briefing room, General William Sullivan stood at the head of a conference table, his face carved from granite and exhaustion. Around him sat his senior staff, including Captain Nathan Reed, who looked as concerned as everyone else. "Let's review," Sullivan said, his voice like gravel. "Falcon team, 90 personnel wiped out 16 days ago. Since then, we've had a series of targeted killings, all connected to known insurgent cells. The Bagheri brothers, Zabidi, and now James Wilcox." He looked around the table. Anyone want to explain how a military contractor ends up dead with 20 dog tags arranged around his body? Silence fell over the room. Sullivan continued, "Who had access to Falcon's final mission parameters? Who authorized their deployment schedules?" The intelligence officer, a major named Phillips, cleared his throat. "According to the log, sir, the authorization came through Colonel Webb's secure channel." Sullivan's eyes went cold. Webb died over a year ago. I was at his funeral. He let the implication hang in the air. Someone in this command has been compromised. Someone with high-level access. Reed shifted in his chair, his face a mask of professional concern. Sir, with respect, we should consider that this might be the work of a rogue operator, someone from Falcon who survived the attack and is now conducting an unauthorized vendetta. All 90 bodies were accounted for, Phillips countered. Were they? Reed asked. In that kind of attack, with those explosives, we're talking about identification through dental records and DNA in many cases. What if? The conference room door opened. Every head turned. Morgan Riley stood in the doorway, uniform torn and dirty, face streaked with grime and dried blood. Her left side was bandaged beneath her shirt, dark stains showing through the fabric. But her blue eyes burned with cold fire. She looked like she'd walked through hell. She looked like she'd conquered it. Lieutenant Riley? Sullivan's shock was evident. You're supposed to be dead. So is Colonel Webb, Morgan replied, her voice steady despite the pain radiating through her body. Yet somehow, his credentials have been very active. She crossed to the conference table, each step measured, controlled, hiding the agony it caused. From her pocket, she withdrew a small USB drive, placing it in front of Sullivan. 16 days of intelligence gathering, she said. Encrypted communications, voice analysis, money transfers. Evidence of a comprehensive betrayal that led to the deaths of 90 American operators. Sullivan picked up the drive, his expression unreadable. This is a serious accusation, Lieutenant. It's not an accusation, sir, Morgan replied. It's evidence. Reed stood slowly, his hand moving casually toward his sidearm. General, surely you're not going to take the word of someone who's clearly suffering from severe PTSD. She needs medical attention, not an audience. Sullivan looked from the drive to Reed, then back to Morgan. Who, Lieutenant? Who betrayed Falcon? Morgan met Reed's eyes across the table. Captain Nathan Reed sold us out for $2 million, transferred through a series of shell companies to an account in the Cayman Islands. He's been working with Nazari's network for at least 14 months. Reed's face hardened. That's absurd. I've served this country for 15 years and betrayed it for the last 2. Morgan countered, You used Webb's credentials after his death, thinking no one would notice. But there's always a digital trail, always a witness, always evidence. She nodded toward the drive. It's all there. The voice analysis matches yours. The money trail leads back to you. The leaked intelligence came from your terminal. Reed's hand closed around his sidearm. This is ridiculous. She's delusional, traumatized. Sullivan's voice cut through the tension. Remove your hand from your weapon, Captain. Sir, I can explain everything on that drive. It's not what it looks. I said, remove your hand, soldier. Reed's expression changed, then the mask of concern falling away to reveal something cold and calculating beneath. His eyes darted around the room, measuring distances, calculating odds. You don't understand, he said quietly. None of you understand what it's like. 15 years of service, 3 tours. And for what? A captain's bars and a salary that barely covers my mortgage, while contractors like Wilcox make millions. Morgan stood perfectly still. You put a price tag on 90 lives. They were soldiers, Reed spat. They knew the risks. His hand moved with sudden speed, drawing his weapon. But Morgan was faster, had always been faster. Before anyone else could react, she launched herself across the table, her body colliding with Reed's. They crashed to the floor, the gun skittering away. Despite her injuries, despite the blood now flowing freely from her reopened wound, Morgan pinned Reed with practiced efficiency. One arm locked behind his back, her knee pressing into his spine. Military police flooded the room, taking control of the situation. As they cuffed Reed, Morgan stepped back, swaying slightly, her face pale from blood loss. Sullivan steadied her with a hand on her arm. You need medical attention, Lieutenant. Morgan shook her head. What I need is justice, sir. For Hayes, for Rodriguez, for Chin, for all of them. And you'll have it, Sullivan promised. Reed will face court-martial for treason. When we're done with him, he'll wish he'd died in that attack too. Morgan's vision was beginning to blur again. The adrenaline that had carried her through the confrontation was fading, leaving only pain and exhaustion in its wake. She felt herself falling, darkness creeping in from the edges of her consciousness. The last thing she heard before blackness took her was Sullivan's voice, quiet but firm. "Get her to medical, now. We're not losing another one." The memorial service happened at dawn, because that's when warriors say goodbye. The base parade ground had been prepared with military precision, 90 empty chairs arranged in perfect rows, each with a name placard. They would remain empty because they weren't for the living. They were for the fallen. Morgan stood at the edge of the formation, still pale from her injuries, but standing tall in her dress uniform. The wound in her side would heal eventually, the wound in her soul that was different. In the center of the empty chairs, she had arranged 90 identification tags in a perfect circle. Each one placed with care, each one representing a life, a story, a future that had been stolen. Morgan moved through the formation slowly, stopping at each chair, each tag. For every fallen brother and sister, she spoke their name, not just what was stamped on the medal, but their full name, their nickname, the story of who they were. "David Hayes," she said, her voice carrying in the morning stillness. "We called him Old Man, even though he could outrun all of us. He loved bad coffee and good books. He was going to retire next year, build a cabin in Montana." Elena Rodriguez, the best medic I've ever known. She saved more lives than anyone could count. She was going to medical school when her tour ended. Would have made one hell of a doctor. Michael Chin, boy genius, could hack anything with a circuit board. Sent half his pay home to his mother in San Francisco. Wanted to start his own security firm someday. 90 names, 90 stories, 90 futures erased. The sun broke over the horizon as she finished, painting everything in gold, the empty chairs, the tags on the ground, her tears that finally began to fall. Behind her, General Sullivan stood at attention, his hand raised in salute. He'd been there for 20 minutes, waiting for her to finish, but he hadn't interrupted. This moment belonged to her and to them. When Morgan had spoken the last name, Sullivan approached, his footsteps deliberate, giving her time to compose herself. He carried a folded flag, the triangle of stars and stripes pressed with ceremonial precision. "For Team Falcon," he said simply, "with honor and with gratitude." Morgan accepted the flag with both hands, cradling it against her chest. It was heavier than she expected, or maybe that was just the weight of everything it represented. "They were the best of us," she whispered. "They were," Sullivan agreed. "But so are you, Lieutenant. Don't forget that." Morgan looked up at him, really looked, and saw something unexpected in his eyes. Not pity, not sympathy, but understanding, respect. "What happens now, sir?" she asked. Sullivan was quiet for a moment, considering his words carefully. "Officially, you're being reassigned. Medical leave, then a training position stateside." He paused. "Unofficially, there's a file on my desk. New unit being formed. They're calling it Ghost Division. Off-book operations. The missions no one else can handle. The people no one else can touch." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "And unofficially, I never had this conversation. You were never here. Team Falcon was avenged by forces unknown." Morgan nodded slowly, understanding. Some things happened in the light. Some things happened in shadow. The world needed both. "Permission to keep these, sir," she gestured to the identification tags. "Granted, they're yours now. Carry them well." She gathered them carefully, one by one, placing them in a leather pouch she'd made from a torn equipment strap. They clinked softly, like wind chimes, in a place where wind never blew. As she straightened, the sun fully cleared the horizon, and across the parade ground, someone started singing low at first, then building an old soldier's hymn about brothers never dying. Other voices joined, then more, until hundreds of soldiers sang for 90 fallen souls, and for the one ghost who'd made sure they wouldn't be forgotten. Morgan closed her eyes and let the music wash over her. When she opened them again, she was smiling. 1 year later, General Sullivan sat in his office, the Afghanistan morning heat already pressing against the windows. On his desk lay a file marked with clearance levels that didn't officially exist, Operation Silent Oath. He opened it with the reverence of a man handling scripture. Inside, a single page. Status, deployed. Location, classified. Attached, a photograph. Black and white, slightly grainy. Morgan Riley in full camouflage, rifle slung across her back, looking directly at the camera, the hint of a smile on her lips. Not the smile of someone who had lost everything, the smile of someone who had found something new, purpose. Sullivan closed the file and locked it in his safe. Some operations you didn't track, some soldiers you didn't monitor. You pointed them at the darkness and trusted they'd know which shadows to hunt. He'd received one message from her 6 months ago. No words, just a photograph. A ridgeline at sunset, a lone figure silhouetted against the golden crimson sky. He'd understood. She was still out there, still watching, still protecting the brothers and sisters who wore the uniform and didn't know her name. Somewhere in the mountains between Pakistan and Afghanistan, Morgan Riley walked a goat path that hadn't appeared on any map since Alexander's time. The afternoon sun warmed her shoulders. Her rifle rested easy against her back. In her pocket, 90 identification tags clicked together like prayer beads. She crested a ridge and paused, looking back the way she'd come. Somewhere beyond those mountains, people slept safely because people like her walked the edge of the world. She'd made peace with it. Not the easy peace of forgetting, but the harder peace of purpose. She'd lost 90, but she'd saved thousands more by making sure traders knew that someone was watching. Someone would come. Morgan turned toward the west, where the sun would set in a few hours, painting the sky in colors that had no names. Her hair caught the breeze, wild and free. Her smile was small but real, the smile of someone who'd walked through fire and found themselves on the other side, scarred but unbroken. Some ghosts never disappear, they just watch from the ridgeline, waiting for the moment when darkness needs pushing back, when betrayal needs answering, when someone needs to stand up because no one else will. And in the gathering dusk, as shadows lengthened across the ancient mountains, the hunter's ghost continued her eternal vigil, watching, waiting, protecting. Because some promises transcend death, some bonds cannot be broken, and some shadows are cast by those who stand in the light, so that others may never know the darkness.